Starting. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so today we have 3 agenda items. First, Oliver Li Zhan and I will present the 1.7 plan we have discussed. And yeah, we want to get feedback from this group before we present it to TOC. And next, I'm going to give updates on the mesh expansion VM security proposal. Previously, Sven and I have, and we previously listed 3 options, and we want to give updates on what option we want to go with. And the last one is Sven has shared a doc about the certificate options. Yeah, so let's start with the first one. Yeah, so for 1.7, we listed the following items. Some of the things we have moved from our 1.6 plan because it was like P1 or P2 at the time, and we didn't have time to work on that, and it was moved over to 1.7. And there are okay. So let's start from the first one. So the first one is multi-cluster certificate provisioning. Do you want to talk about it, Oliver?
So for the multi-cluster, we have 2 items here. The first one is to align the single control plane multi-cluster setup, which enables users to use a single control plane for XDS information as well as certificate provisioning. So this one is already started, and I think we want to get it to a good state in 1.7. And there's a tracking issue already. For the next one, multi-cluster, multi-intermediate cert provisioning automation. So today we already have, I believe in 1.6, as Riggs is updating their documentation, we'll have a good documentation to talk about how to set it up, but it's not well automated from what I'm seeing. So this is more about like an improvement, how to automate that. So you will have like a offline root cert and intermediate certs for every cluster. Yeah.
Thanks, Oliver. So the next one is better support for VM mesh expansion. I listed the 3 items. The first one is securely provision VM mesh identity based on VM's platform identity. So that's for the case that the VM already has an existing identity. We already shared a proposal, which I'm going to give updates on that one. And the next one is to securely bootstrap VM's identity for VMs without existing identity. We already saw a lot of requirements from the community, like Srirun and Sincere was actively working on that. And yeah, I also want to spend some time to have a proper design and basically have a consensus on the proposal, how to move forward. There are several proposals currently on the table. The third one is to improve user experience for VM security setup during onboarding. I believe Cynthia has already looking into it, and I will work with her on that. It's also related to the previous 2 items, I think. The next one is better support for certificate provisioning. Oliver, do you want to take over?
Yeah.
Okay.
The first one is vault integration. In the past, we had vault integration, and yeah, recently, in recent releases, we removed it because of lack of support. So for 1.7, I think we want to add it back. And the architecture is using Istio as RA. And we also want to make this generic, a general interface, so that if you have other backend CAs, you can also integrate with Istio. Yeah, that's why it's making Istio.
Can I put a small comment here?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So one of the documents describing the VM mesh expansion is about using cert manager, which has integration with both Vault and Vanafi, or whatever it's called, and Acme. So we need to discuss, because again, there are multiple options. One is to just integrate via cert manager, which is possible kind of today.
Yeah, that's one of the options. Yes, that's for bootstrapping VM identity. Right?
No, but that's for actual Kubernetes identity as well, because that allows integration of Vault for signing certificates for pods, not only for VMs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we can discuss that in when Sven is talking about the options.
If you are using Cert Manager, the most intuitive way for Cert Manager integration is through the secret, right?
No, but they have integration with multiple CAs, and they have an extension mechanism where you can integrate more CA providers. That's why, including Vault and Vanafi, and I think there are others who are integrating with them.
Yeah, I guess the question here is how to integrate that with SDS, not reading from secret.
Oh, it's still through Istio. I think I explained in the doc. It's still they're also planning to implement the Kubernetes signing, so pretty much we have the code if they finish up that work, or we help them to do that.
So you are saying Istio already has some integration with Vault? No.
No, Istio has integration with Kubernetes signing, the certificates.
Right.
Cert Manager is implementing the same APIs that Kubernetes provides. So when they do that, there will be one signer in the Kubernetes API, and in turn they have multiple plugins for Vault and other CA. So Istio will just not have to make any change really, except help them and kind of test it with Cert Manager. We can take it offline and we can discuss it in my design doc.
Okay.
Wait, Costa, do you have a design
is
doc for using this for workload certificates, not just the control plane bootstrapping stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the same one that was just the cert manager VM stuff?
Yes. That one is focusing on how to provision VMs, but exactly the same thing can be applied for
okay. Because I've been looking at the Kubernetes CA signing. They're trying to go to V1, and when they go to V1, they will not support our current usage. So there's some concerns there. But
right.
I mean, with Cert Manager, it would be fine as long as Cert Manager implements it. But Kubernetes itself signing it.
No. Cert Manager will be a signer for Kubernetes. So Kubernetes has its own.
Yeah. That will work for sure.
Cert Manager will be a third signer, and Vault will be another signer, and so forth.
Yep.
I think we should probably go chat with the Kubernetes security team about some of this stuff. Might be
definitely
good use of time.
Yeah, I had a chat with Mike Dennis, but I will schedule a meeting probably sometime to talk about their API change on their side. The next one is make sure Istio CA API public in Istio/API. So this one is asked from the community. This is also like a kickstart of making Istio security as a platform, not as a solution. So if we expose the API publicly and make the API better defined, we enable better integration with other security systems or PKIs. Last one.
This is also a bit controversial. We propose the same thing on Envoy, to have Envoy actually do this whole implement the API, and there are kind of discussion in the Envoy community of how to implement it natively in Envoy and using Acme versus other things. And there is an active proposal and discussion.
It's not necessarily, yeah. So integration
question
point is different, right? Integration point is different, but
but we want to. I think the desire is to use Envoy. I mean, if we cannot use the Istio agent and have Envoy do everything, including CSR generation, everything, that would be ideal because we don't have to maintain all the pieces. That is kind of a replacement. And gRPC is also involved in the same discussion about using this new. I think gRPC team is driving this in Envoy right now. We can take it offline again. It's a long discussion.
Okay. Yeah, my concern about like putting too much functionalities into Envoy is already like taking a lot of functions and features. It's already heavy weighted if we put more into it.
Well, if we also take up it, if we take out more than we put, it's still good. And I think this is a replacement for SDS because again, Step Manager has some problems. Sorry, gRPC has some problems. Again, we can take it offline.
Yeah. Last one, support provision certificate to applications without running Envoy. This is a leftover from 1.6 goals. We still want to do that, and we put this into 1.7. Yeah. So I can also cover the next one if Jimmy is not here. Parameter security, support SDS at egress gateway. Yeah. I don't need to talk too much. This is to align the ingress gateway. We want to also have a production level support for egress. Automated E2E test to cover egress task that comes with the first one. Yeah.
Okay. The next one is improvement on authorization engine. The first one is to have a better support for plugging third-party authorization engine through the external authorization interface. I think Srirun also has some proposal in this area, and Yangmin was also looking into it. So this requirement has been raised up in several use cases. And the second one is to support custom attributes for authorization engine. So authorization engine currently gets its input from the authentication filter, which includes the George claims and the MTS status. There are also people were also asking to support the custom attributes, for example, the labels and the other stuff. And we need a good way to support it. And next one, I think Lisa.
Yeah, that's a joint effort with the networking working group. One is like migrating our like existing filter for authentication for enforcing authentication policy to migrate it to WebAssembly, and another is the enhanced transport security, like to see what that involved in the security stuff we are doing here, like certificate provisioning or like policy enforcement change based on that. That's the two items. I did it as P1.
Yeah. Okay. So the last one is to improve test and documentation. So first is we want to add a large-scale performance test for authentication and authorization policy. And the second one is we want to improve the security documentation and the best practice guide. This was actually the leftover from 1.6. I think we still want to do it. The third one is to complete the user guide tests automation. We already added some user guide tests for to cover the user guide that's on istio.io. We want to complete all the automation for these user guide tests. And the last one is listed as P2, which is to improve security troubleshooting with Istio. This is also a nice feature to have. We make it P2 because we are not sure if we actually have time to get to this one. Yeah. So this is all about 1.7 plan. Do we have any question? If not, we are going to move to the next agenda item. Okay, yeah, so the next agenda item is I want to give some updates on mesh expansion VM security design. So previously we listed 3 options to support VM identity provisioning, and we had some iteration on these options. I have updated the doc, so the decision I think in the updated doc is that we are going with which was listed as option 3. So basically, we are not going to have the API server dependency. Instead, Istio agent is going to directly send the VM identity token to Istio D. And on Istio D, we are going to define multiple plugins, which we call it identity provider. So, and the identity provider basically defines how to authenticate the VM credential and how to map the third-party credential claim into the mesh identity. So I have, so for this, user needs to define the rule basically for authentication and identity mapping. For this purpose, we are going to introduce a new CRD called identity provider. The identity provider is basically specifies how a request is authenticated and how the identity mapping is done. So this is an example of the identity provider.
I think there's a, we can talk about it when we talk about my doc, but there's a proposal. I have a proposal to split that into 2 parts so that the registration of the IDP and specifying the mapping are separated.
Yeah, I actually started with 2 parts, but eventually I merged them into 1. And I think this model works better, but we can discuss about it. So basically,
go ahead.
Sorry, I put a comment in both docs that the first part, when we split it, is actually duplicating the existing APIs that we have to configure identity providers for regular stuff. The JOT request authentication API. So maybe the first part we can split it and bring it.
Yeah,
it's depending.
But that's separate, right? I replied to your comments. So basically, the request authentication is enforced on Envoy, and this is actually.
Sure, but it doesn't matter where it's enforced. The API is the same. So the API is the same. It doesn't matter where it's enforced. We can enforce it wherever we want. We can put an Envoy in front of Istio D. We can implement it in Istio D. I mean, the API doesn't mean implementation.
Yeah. So the reason I want to put them together is that we are going to use some of the claims in the identity in the identity mapping rule. So, for example, workload.assertion actually refers to the authenticated claim. If you are using different authentication mechanism, the output is different, and it's hard to figure out which corresponds to the claim we are referring to here. So,
but
yeah.
Claims are not identity. Claims are part of authorization, not part of. We need to be review them because then they provide hope.
Yeah, we can list the different options, configuration options to compare which one works better. At least I already compared the separate one and the combined one, and I think this is.
So a proposal, Liman, a proposal here would be that we try to unify registering identity providers with Istio across the stuff we use for registering VMs and the user. I don't know if that actually makes sense to do so because they're for very different domains, but we could at least have them share an API. So that there's one notion of, all right, the mesh admin is registering what identity providers are supported for users and what identity providers are supported for certificates. for service accounts, really.
And that's also already the namespace, and there's also properties for what particular identity of trust for, and that is again, it's a common API that can be implemented by Istio as well as Workload.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying if we can unify those so we don't have two different APIs that look very similar but do slightly different things.
You mean for the user auth, we want to combine with the identity provider API?
Well, so no, that we have one API for registering identity providers with Istio. And then you use that in Jot for end user auth, and you use that in identity mapping for VMs. But that the way you register IDPs is made consistent.
Yeah. If I remove the authentication part, but just refer to authentication, another like you request auth definition, I can do that, but it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense as request auth because it's not request auth. So it's a little weird.
Yeah.
It's something to consider.
So basically the identity provider includes the following fields: the type. Currently we support OIDC in Istio already, and for OIDC type, and the config is specific for this type of authentication. So for OIDC, the config should include the issuer URL. If you actually have type X59, so the configuration should be the client CA certificate, so that you can authenticate the client certificate. And the other fields are for identity mapping. So name, because the final identity, the mesh identity format is basically trust domain /NS/namespace/SA/service count. So trust domain is one for every mesh. We have a single trust domain, which is in the trust domain config in mesh config. So we don't need to specify that. What we need to specify is how namespace is derived from the workload identity, and the service count is derived from the third-party identity. So that's why we have these two fields, namespace and the service count. And there is also an optional condition, which specifies when the rule applies. Yeah, go ahead, Kostin. Kostin, I think your voice is breaking down. We cannot hear you clearly.
Oh, sorry. I want to say there is a trust multi-tenant effort in that would mean that the trust domain will not be common and the same. And second, there is a requirement that we are still debating if we want to allow namespaces or trust or tenant admins to be isolated from each other.
So for the first one,
which implies that API may not work.
Yeah. So for the first one, I know when mesh is migrating, we can have multiple trust domains. But if that's only for the migration case. Normally in the authorization policy, we actually use cluster.local to refer to the local trust domain. That's the trust domain I'm talking about. Yeah.
But the proposal is to change this, and multi-tenant implies.
We might want to extend this to allow the mapping to specify a trust domain.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine too. But
enhancement.
But this is optional, right?
Yeah. It would just by default you'd use whatever the default trust domain is of the mesh or of the cluster that you're testing.
In case there are multiple trust domains.
Yeah.
Customer can specify one. Okay. Yeah,
If
but I think currently we encourage user to use cluster.local to refer to the local trust domain, so that they don't need to change their policy when they migrate from
yeah,
one
but
mesh
that's
to the other.
for policies, not for generated certificates, right? The certificates need a real trust domain, not right. The certificates aren't aliases; they need to actually reflect a real trust domain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fundamental question is: do we want to allow user to control it, or is it something that is enforced? Because that creates that if we want to provide action and control, users should to specify names, because obviously if I create in a namespace A, I cannot impersonate name B.
Can you say it again?
If I agree on the
Yeah, I cannot.
So if
Austin, you need better Wi-Fi.
Okay, sorry. Let me switch. Can you hear me better now? Okay, keep going. Then it's fine.
You can try typing into the chat.
Better now? Okay. Can you hear me now? I just changed the microphone. Is it better? No?
A little bit better.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I wanted to say that if we agree on the requirement to have isolation, meaning that namespace admin and or trust or tenant are isolated from each other, we certainly do not want to give tenant or namespace to private. If entity mapping, whatever is called in namespace A, definitely don't want to define namespace B. It should not be if we are required.
I think I heard the tenant isolation, but I didn't hear your whole sentence.
So I think the one problem, so when we do the mapping, I don't know if this is what Costin's getting at, but right now you have a namespace field. You have two namespaces, right? In your example CRD, there shouldn't be two namespaces. There should just be one, right? There should just be, I put my mapping in a namespace saying what things get mapped into that, and that's it. I shouldn't put something in Istio system that says this thing maps into this other namespace, because that's breaking the multi-tenancy requirements.
Wait, where are the two namespace? You mean the two project ID?
You have metadata namespace and you have spec namespace.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know we have debating on this CRD should be defined by namespace owner or should be defined by mesh owner.
So the mapping should be defined by the namespace owner, and the list of supported providers should be by the mesh admin potentially. Although we could also let the providers be namespace owner as well, right? Yeah. It goes to the multi-tenancy question. So if we want to actually support multi-tenancy, we can't have, like, multi-tenancy means you can't require things to be done in Istio system.
Why can't the mesh admin define the mapping? So mesh admin is just defining one federation rule.
Because we want to support multi-tenancy, Lehman.
Yeah, I know multi-tenancy. So namespace admin will decide each VM will get what identity in their namespace. But how to map the specific field to a mesh identity, that rule can be decided by mesh admin. No. It's just the federation step, like the last step. How do you federate TCP?
That doesn't satisfy the requirements of multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy
or multi-namespace. It's not only tenant.
Multi-tenancy is multiple namespace, right? The namespace owner is defining the identity for all the VMs in its namespace.
So Leeman, hold on a second. So the multi-tenancy requirement is a namespace owner cannot be required to contact a mesh admin in order to get their work done.
Yeah, but mesh admin can request, I want to join this mesh. So
no, so we want a namespace admin to be able to say, hey, I want this project to join the mesh without having to talk to a mesh admin.
No, but mesh admin has to admit allow the request, right? No. Mesh admin has to control that. Otherwise, anybody can join the mesh.
No, they have to give someone access to a namespace. But once they have access to a namespace, they should be able to do whatever they want in that namespace. So the mesh admin only comes in saying, hey, Lehman, you get access to namespace foo. And now you have namespace foo, and you should be able to go say, I'd like to support GCE VMs in this namespace, and I'm going to map them in from this project. And you cannot be required to go talk to the mesh admin to do that. So that is a hard requirement of our support for multi-tenancy.
Okay, so mesh admin cannot say like how the which project so this one is also the admission control policy, right? Like which GCP project can join this namespace?
Yes.
So do you mean we need a separate policy saying the mapping should be defined separately?
So I think it's fine if you just put it. So it works if you just say this goes in the namespace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than having two namespaces, you just have the one, and you say this whole thing goes in the namespace. It's the provider and it's the mapping. It's a little duplication, but it's okay. It would work, right? It lets the system work. So that would be a start. Is just take out the second namespace field and just say, rather than putting this in Istio system, put it in, GC project ID or whatever your namespace name is, right? Actually, it's better not to use that because then it's more obvious.
No, this is if this is authorization or admission control, it has to be controlled by mesh admin.
No.
You cannot let the namespace admin to define that.
Why would that be the case?
If it's authorization, of course, mesh admin needs to decide who can join my mesh, and that's how the condition is defined, right?
No, then we don't have to do it that way, right? Mesh admin does not say who is allowed to call service X in namespace foo, right? It's up to the namespace admins to decide who can call them.
Who can?
So I'm saying just change Istio system to arbitrary namespace and delete your extra namespace, and then it's fine.
Yeah, but let's change the authorization model. Like mesh admin loses control for authorization or admission control.
Yeah, that's fine.
But that's not okay, right? We will route the authorization for the entire mesh.
No, not at all. Because things are still bound to that namespace, right? So these policies only work for that namespace and nowhere else.
Let me try to explain a different way. If you are a namespace admin, you can take a certificate and put it wherever you want, on AWS or wherever you want. So as a namespace admin, you already have the power to run your workloads with your identity wherever you please. We want to reflect this. The API should reflect exactly that you can take your identity and put it wherever you want. So it doesn't change the current the security status. The current security posture is that if I want to run something on a VM on AWS, I can by copying the security. We just want to make it easier.
Yeah.
Okay. So who is defining the identity provider? You mean the namespace admin is defining the identity provider in this case?
Yeah.
Okay. Namespace admin is trying to register. It's like a register cluster, right? It's like you want to register this cluster to the mesh.
Yeah,
and who is allowing it?
You're registering a project into a namespace, into your name.
Yeah, and who is allowing that? Who is allowing you register your project into the mesh?
No, not into the mesh, into the namespace.
Yeah, into the
namespace, not mesh.
Yeah. You're saying this namespace trusts this GCE project. And I'm going to allow that project to mint identities in this namespace. And that's fine, because as Costin said, right, you already have the ability to mint identities. So you're just you're extending the scope of who can mint those to other people.
And they also have ability to specify for gateway and for workload communication to specify an external identity.
Another example is like a namespace admin could grant anyone they want in the namespace access to the secrets of the namespace, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's just the namespace admin already has access to that stuff, so they can get granted.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let me think about it a little more. Yeah, I think it's probably makes some sense. But yeah, let me add the comments and yeah, we can, so that I can, yeah, follow up.
And I want to add one small comment here. This is also worth discussing in the context of the previous request authentication, because even for request authentication, we may want to extend the API that we have today to include restrictions on projects. So I can say I want to authenticate with GCP or AWS identity provider and OIDC, but only if it's in project foo. So I restrict the JOT tokens as I accept in normal gateway and workload communication that we already provide.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's covered by authorization in theory.
Okay.
That's fine. I mean, but I would like to have consistency between the APIs. I mean, if we have an API that is, we want to do it at authentication level, we should do it consistently in both APIs. I mean, for JOT tokens, for workload, and for this purpose.
Yeah, I think the problem here is that this CRD is mixing authentication and authorization. And so I think that's where we were having problems of, hey, maybe we should split it. So we split the authentication from the authorization.
Yeah, but here they are actually related. So I actually didn't mention the workload attribute part. Yeah, so when you define service count or condition, you can use the workload attributes to represent the property of the workloads.
Yeah, we do the same thing in authorization, right? The same thing. Authorization policy lets you specify claims from the authentication, right? They're tied together, clearly. It doesn't mean
but in this case, there are multiple identity providers, and each one will have different authentication mechanism it uses.
Sure.
And which claim you are actually referring to is hard.
But again, that's the same as with authorization, right? No difference.
Authorization, currently there is only one authorization filter after the authentication filter. So it's very clear the output is just from the authentication filter. But in this case, every plugin has its own authentication and the corresponding attributes.
I think unless we extend the authorization policy semantics a little bit, otherwise it will only support one identity provider, which means currently it's only coming from the request authentication policy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not true. I mean, right now you can write an authorization policy and against any claims. I mean, implementation may have this limitation, but not the API. The API, what in the API restricted to a single provider? You can specify pretty much anything.
So if in the future we support AWS, say, and it will generate the assertion, and in the meanwhile there will also be like a GC or OIDC token coming. When we talk about workload assertion, which one we actually
let's move on and let's follow up on this
in
docs with some examples, with options.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So so I don't need to talk about the runtime flow. It's actually pretty simple. Istio agents just get the credential, VM credential, and sends to Istio D, and Istio D authenticate and generate mesh identity and issue the certificate.
Yeah, maybe put a link to the implementation because it's already implemented.
Yeah. So the user flow. First, mesh admin is to create the Kubernetes namespace for the VM, and then it's defined the identity provider policy. And I think Sven's comment is we can let namespace admin to define the identity provider policy. And for each VM, basically you create a workload entry. I think that's covered in the workload entry proposal. And what we need to do is to set the service count field to the VM's service count. And the VM service count does not have to be a real Kubernetes service count. In this case, in the example we just mentioned, it can be just a TCP service count email.
Yeah, so I think that's a potentially controversial point of discussion. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts on whether it's problematic for us to generate identities that talk about service accounts in namespaces where those service accounts don't exist as a resource in the cluster. I don't know of anything that would break, but
but otherwise we are going to create too many service accounts. Like for every third-party service account, we have to create a corresponding Kubernetes service accounts. And yeah.
Well, they're relatively cheap. One question
and
I have
it's not very useful, other than you know that there's a service account exists.
Yeah, it's useful for validation. So
yeah,
if you're doing authorization policy validation, saying like you're checking the value of the fields and like raising errors, if someone put in authorization policy where they misspelled the name of a service account, you can't do that anymore. So I think that's the main benefit for validation.
Yeah, but if we already if we let user know this is not the assumption for third party, like the VM mesh expansion identity, they do not correspond to a real Kubernetes service account.
I think it's fine for us to start without them and revisit if it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Or to start with them and then remove them because this is good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Secure naming is secure naming is the only thing that you need to take care of if there's no Kubernetes service account exists corresponding to your.
Yeah, secure naming. Secure naming is just we're just doing a string comparison, right?
Yeah. Do we actually
just support the GCP service account?
We need to add their custom identities to the annotation of the services today to support the secure naming for like external identities. So we'll continue to do that, right?
Mm-hmm. What annotation? Sorry.
So secure naming by default it checks the API server, like which service account is running which service, but that's under the assumption that the service accounts are Kubernetes service accounts. So those are all automated.
Right.
But if you have VMs identities that are not mapped to Kubernetes service accounts, then when you are using those VMs to serve some services, those identities, the VM identities, are not tracked by the API server. So the secure naming information cannot be built correctly. So you need to annotate the services in Kubernetes. Say, okay, those service accounts are also running this service. And then Istio will pick it up and build the correct secure naming.
Yeah, so in this case, actually, for VM case, it's not Kubernetes pod, right? The corresponding item for Kubernetes pod is a workload entry. We are adding the service count to workload entry. So that's the equivalent.
It's not equivalent. The Istio D, in order to send clusters, it needs to know the list of all the identities that are acceptable for that cluster. That's independent. We don't care if you're running on a VM, you're running wherever. When you generate clusters for clients, we need to send the list of stands that we accept. And that's built on the service, not workload. And it needs to include the third-party identity. I mean, it includes today because we support this feature already to use third-party identities. My concern is that, again, we have two solutions, really. We have a solution where we're using the annotation of the service, which already exists, and we have this identity mapping. I'm fine with either way, but it's good to know which one is which and make it clear that there's two different ways to do the same thing.
What's the second way? Can you say it again?
So traditionally, we have this mapping where you're specifying that identity at gcp.com is correspond to my service account whatever, which is this identity mapping. And then we have the one we have already where you specify service foo can also support service account.gcp.google account or whatever, AWS, and then use the external identity directly. I think Sam mentioned already that we have this kind of two ways. One is to map everything to service account. The other one is to just use the third-party identity directly in everywhere. Both of them are very good, valid, and have benefits and drawbacks. Maybe we support both of them, but we need to be clear what solution is.
Yeah, I think currently we are using the third-party identity directly.
And that's supported. Has been supported
but it's mapped to our Kubernetes namespace. That's the only thing.
No, to a service. It's not to a service. You specify that this GCP identity is one of the secure naming alternatives for this particular service.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are running out of time, and Sven also needs time to talk about it. So maybe we can follow up on the secure naming stuff. We still need to validate, how secure naming works, but yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I think secure naming actually will be easier than we think it is. So
yeah,
hopefully we can just read workload entries and grab the stuff there.
Yeah. So sorry, Sven, I don't think you have a lot of time left.
So do you want to present the other doc?
Yeah, I can present
real quick.
Oh, okay, yeah, up to you. Do you want to present?
No, so since we don't have time, I can just
talk
about what this is about. And then it was more, I wanted to make sure everyone in this working group had a chance to look at this and comment and be part of the discussion about it. So this actually has some of the federation stuff in it. We were playing with things a little bit. So there's a little bit overlap with Leeman's doc, but it's really more, the focus is on solving the first problem, which is bootstrapping identity without some other third-party identity. So I don't have, I'm not on GCP, I'm not on AWS. I just have a VM that I spun up, right? It's just a bare VM, it has nothing on it. And how do I get a certificate from Istio onto that VM, right? And what's the process? And so this doc lists, it doesn't have a solution. It doesn't have a chosen solution. It has a long list of options. And likely we want to support more than one of those options as the long-term approach. But there's a whole long list of things. And so people can come take a look, comment, get involved in the discussion. That's the main thing. Since I don't have time to go through all the details.
Oh, we still have 10 minutes. Do you want to?
Okay, well then, so maybe if you go back to the top, I'll talk about the goals a little bit.
Yeah.
So in the, so you can read forget the overview, forget the problems with the current approach. Hopefully already people know what the problems are. So the goals here, the first one is what Leeman was just talking about with her doc. So we'll skip that one. But then the second one is the main goal I want to cover here, which is I don't have an identity. I want to, if I have namespace access, I want to be able to get that VM with a certificate on it in a secure way, and have that, I do not want to require cluster admins. That's back to the requirement of multi-tenancy. And I want to make sure, I'm not sure if this was actually here, but that the VM can handle restarts at least to some limited extent. So it's not, if it restarts, everything shouldn't fall apart, right? It should keep working. So the use cases here, you can ignore the first use case. Again, that's for Leeman's doc. But then, if I have a CI/CD system that's minting certificates, we want a solution that tells people, hey, here's how to set up CI/CD, here's how to manage your identities. Maybe they're using an external CI, maybe they're doing something else. But then for users who are not even using CI/CD and are just like directly managing their VMs, what should they do? And can they use some tool to mint certificates? And how do we manage identities? So this is the list of requirements here. So they should be able to survive restarts. You shouldn't have to rebootstrap. They should be compatible with hardware security. So if a VM has, a TPM or HSM or whatever those things are called, you can actually use those to bootstrap security, and you're not, copying keys around. All right, the keys should be able to stay on the VM and never leave the VM. Ideally, the credential would not be a runtime credential, but would be a bootstrap credential. Originally, we made that a hard require, and I'm softening that a little bit, I think, because it might be okay if you just kind of get the first runtime credential and then keep rotating it. That might be okay. And then again, a namespace admin has to be able to mint this. Go ahead, Austin.
Sorry, just want to mention that TPMs also provide assertions for VMs, so they are pre-provisioned, and you can, kind of assert the identity and use it as a way to bootstrap the process directly. Anyway, that's just advanced fancy stuff.
I should probably add a section on that. I need to do more research. I should probably add some ideas of how that would work. It's more focused on the case when you don't have that. But so ways that people can do this. So one thing we could do is actually, well, so there was Costin's proposal of having our own thing. We kind of rejected that. We could use Cert Manager to control minting certificates. So the flow would be, the flow for most of these that ends up with a cert is go to the VM, create a private key there, and create a CSR, and then copy the CSR out, and then stick that somewhere, get back a certificate, and copy that back. And then the detail is where do you stick it. So one option is you stick it into Cert Manager's credential request object. There's actually a number of problems with Cert Manager. You can see the link doc there that Costin has. Cert Manager sort of natively supports CA certs, but not any sort of authorization policies around who can access what. So it doesn't have a notion of, this namespace provider. This namespace can access spiffy identities in that namespace. There's no such thing as that. So we'd have to either have them add that, or we'd have to add something that manages that. Another option is, instead of doing that, we could just become a complete external issuer to Cert Manager, and then we'd control that completely. Maybe a better answer is actually, instead of doing that, integrate into Kubernetes API server. I'm a little bit farther down if you want to keep going. We could, actually, I don't know where that one went, but instead of doing Cert Manager API, we could do the Kubernetes certificate API. But it's the same kind of thing, right? You just go get a CSR from the VM, create some resource in the namespace you want with a CSR asking for an identity in that namespace. And then something goes and validates that and says, yes, you're in the namespace, so you're allowed to get an identity in the namespace. Congratulations. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Kubernetes and Cert Manager are pretty much identical solution, and I think Cert Manager is planning to implement the Kubernetes API as a first class. So basically, there will be only one, create the CSR, and they have the same problem of authorization. I don't think there is any, they're not two different solutions, it's just a temporary work, basically. Or two implementation of the same API with slight variations right now.
Yeah, and I think so the thing we really need to figure out is what's the best way to plug in this kind of identity authorization that we want to do, saying, if you're in this namespace, you can access identities in that namespace. Is it Acme based? Is it something else? So I think that's one of the big discussions we need to have. And how much of that do we do in Istio versus trying to get agreement on that in some wider community? Because the general problem for spiffy certs and spiffy identities is just, right, there's not a standard equivalent of Acme for spiffy yet, where you say, here's how you control identities. The other options described in here, there's a couple other ones which are not based on certs, and they're basically copy some form of token over to the VM instead. So either the long-term service account token or a short-lived one. There's actually reasons to like that approach. There's some problems with it, right? Because those are bearer tokens. But on the other hand, at least in the short term, they would give you access to the API server in ways that you can't get otherwise. So like the VM would be able to, be a member of the namespace.
Sorry.
Ideally, over some longer term, we could move to using certificates for access to the API server. Actually, I think that some of that's already in there. Maybe we should add that as an option here too. But anyway, that's the list. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about a short-term approach. We might have missed the boat a little bit already, but there was discussion about whether we should, for 1.6 or like a patch for 1.6, try to provide tooling to let people put the token on the VM and make it easier to do that. I don't know if Istio agent would just work out of the box with that, or if we have to do some work there, but
I suspect it will work. I suspect it will just work because Istio agent at startup is looking for the token. If it finds it, it's going to one direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Surya mentioned this to me before, but if you just put if you call token request to get the token, I think normally the TTL for token will not be very long.
So you can set a TTL.
No,
You can explicitly stat it.
I meant to use the long-lived token. So if you enable the first-party authentication in Istio, you can just stick the long-lived service account token in a particular file path, I mean, var, run, secrets, whatever, and then Istio agent will just assume that it's on a pod and just use it. Send it to Istio.
So you mean that's the first-party token does not have expiration data at all, right?
That works today. I mean, it's supported. It works. It's not the best option, but it's good enough.
So I think, yeah, the question is, can we, as a short-term option, just document that and provide guidance on here's how to do that? Because it seems like it's at least better than what we have today as documented.
I can tell you I tested this. I mean, I've used it when I do development on my local machine. I just copy the token and I tested this Istio agent this way. So I expect it will still work.
Yeah, I don't know if the current code actually checks the expiration time, but
there's an option.
Even if it is, we can still ignore it for VM case.
Yeah.
Are we saying we copy the first party jot to the VM and use that?
Yeah, I think that's the proposal.
That's very similar to copying their private key, right? It's just user experience might be a little bit easier.
Yeah, but how do we get the private key? That's a problem. We don't have a way to get the private key.
Security-wise, it's
Security-wise, it's similar.
Yeah. So it's not as good as getting a certificate on there, especially if the private key stayed on the VM, right? Like that's obviously a better solution, but until we have that, the proposal is let's just like document that for 1.6 so people stop doing the, let's get the root CA's certs and right. Like the proposal right now, going back to the multi-tenancy thing, right? Like the only thing documented requires mesh admin to basically be minting the certificates for VMs. And this would say, hey, a namespace admin can actually mint the certificates for the VMs. That's like an improvement. And then we would, figure out for 1.7 options for what we want to do.
And it's functionally equivalent to what pods are doing. Pods have access to this long token.
So if people are okay with that as a, again, very short-term solution, we can work on documenting that and possibly providing a very, very short tool that just grabs a token. Because I think you can actually do this by not the only option is calling token request API, right? You can also create a secret of type service account token and just grab the result of that. Kubernetes spells it out, which I did not know about until yesterday.
Yeah, I guess for 1.6 we cannot do much. Yeah, maybe this is just some kind of workaround.
Then I think we document this for the multi-cluster setup where we create secrets to connect to different API servers. So that's exactly the same thing where you're creating this your remote service account, and we grab the secret to put it in the pilot.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Okay, so we'll work on writing that up more as a real doc that says, hey, here's the proposal, and then let's sign off on it. And if Cynthia is still on, maybe we can work together on getting that into something usable. I don't know if we can change the bootstrap thing or not, but okay.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, everyone please look at this doc and provide feedback.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I think
Thank you.
this meeting was very productive.
Right. Bye.
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 Bye.